Good afternoon, everybody. We're just a shade after 4:30, is it? Yeah. So we've got about an hour to go. I'm delighted to introduce you to Dr. Bill Stone, who's with us for the next hour. Can I also remind you that probably on your seats are some feedback sheets, which it looks like a lot of you are studiously filling out with a lot of positive comments, I'm sure. So thank you for that. They're on your seats. So perfect, right. Okay, so Bill Stone, somebody I've known for maybe 3 days. I feel I've known him a lot longer than that. Bill graduated as a vet from Wisconsin University. I won't mention years on this sort of thing, but he... 1987. Okay. And then did his PhD at Cornell. But he is now the Director of Technical Services and Research with Diamond V. And I'm delighted that he's with us. This morning he did a workshop in the orangery before the heat sort of took off over there. And maybe some of you were in that workshop. But Bill, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for taking the time to travel over to the UK and be with us this afternoon and this week. And so I'd ask you just to, you've got about an hour, I guess, improving feed efficiency. So thank you very much indeed, Bill. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for being here. And you can all hear me okay? Okay, excellent. And so this is what we'll be talking about today. But first, I just wanted to share with you a couple of experiences and...
It's the way you tell it.
It's stories. Yeah, it's a good one, I guess, yeah. But basically, what I was talking to our neighbors a couple weeks ago, and the 4th of July is a pretty big day in the United States. Okay, and I mentioned to our neighbors that, some of you that were at my talk earlier today, I had said that my family's coming over this Friday, and we're going to get to spend a week touring beautiful England, which we're really looking forward to. And so my neighbor said, "Oh, you can be there on the 4th of July." And I said, "Yes, we will be." And she said, "Oh, I wonder what kind of fireworks they have to celebrate the 4th. So that was one which I thought was interesting. But then the other one I have to tell you guys too was, which I thought was really neat. In the Revolutionary War in Vermont, there was one of our military leaders, his name was Ethan Allen. And the Green Mountains are in Vermont. And so Ethan Allen's group is called Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys. Okay, and they'd go and, of course, engage in battle, obviously. And after the war had concluded, this is a story told actually by President Lincoln. When he was running, before President Lincoln became president, he was a lawyer in Illinois. And at that time, lawyers weren't just in cities. They would instead travel throughout the rural areas and come to a community, and they'd try all the law cases that had accumulated over the previous year in that area. And they'd be, the 2 lawyers and the judge would be there. That's how things were decided that way. But at night, it was a big social interaction time. And President Lincoln was we're told, a very big storyteller, and really enjoyed it very much. And this is a story that he told. I just wanted to preface my discussion with that, okay? So this is President Lincoln speaking, and he's touring Illinois, and he's talking about Ethan Allen. And after the war had concluded several years, Ethan Allen came here to England. And he was dressed in his woodsman clothes, and basically, the English people at the time were making fun of poor Ethan Allen. Like, look at that guy, look at how he's dressed, and oh boy, just kind of laughing about him. And finally they thought, one way we're really going to get him is in the loo, in the bathroom, this outhouse that was there. They thought, let's put a picture of George Washington there. They thought, what a great spot to put a picture of George Washington in the bathroom. So they did. And they put that picture there. And Ethan Allen at some point used the bathroom. And he came out, and he didn't say anything. He just went about interacting with people. And finally, these English men that had done it, they were laughing, and they finally couldn't take it anymore. And they said, "Mr. Allen, what did you think of that picture of George Washington in the bathroom?" They laughed and laughed. And he said, "Well, I think it's entirely appropriate." And he said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "Because nothing makes an Englishman shit so fast as the sight of General Washington." So anyway, I had to do that, you guys. But today we'll talk about feed efficiency. And the title I was given is Where Does It Start? And I really like that one more than just feed efficiency in general, because we've got lots of things we can think about and discuss as we think about where does it all really start. And one real big one with feed efficiency, we want to make sure that we correct for the energy content of the milk. If you just take raw milk and divide it by dry matter intake, you're going to have really fluctuating numbers. Of course, because those component levels are varying. If you're trying to compare it with your neighbor and you're benchmarking with different groups, you have to energy correct it. And you want to also do that for your own benefit, just because over time, again, we have component fluctuations. So we want to do it at least on a fat-corrected milk basis, and even better is energy-corrected milk. It's a ratio, and with a ratio, it makes it more difficult to determine the economics of a specific intervention. And so that, to me, is a little bit of a weakness of it. You got to think about what am I trying to get out of looking at feed efficiency. And I'm going to share with you some real strengths of it, but that's one little weakness. One thing that we really like to look at is income over feed cost. So if you make any, especially a nutritional intervention, typically there's an additional cost associated with that, and you want to look at what's my output, what's my increased output I'm getting, how much more money am I now getting for my milk, minus what's my additional feed cost. So it's actually your total feed cost. My total milk income minus my feed cost. What is my income or feed cost before and after this intervention as you evaluate it? And that's the benefit of this other approach of looking at feed and looking at production. But both can be of some benefit. So again, feed efficiency, pounds of energy-corrected milk per pounds of dry matter intake. Just some examples of it, and it can vary extremely widely. These are real numbers. So 53 pounds of energy-corrected milk I've seen in a research study divided by 50 pounds of dry matter intake for a feed efficiency of 1.06. And then another situation, 98 pounds of energy-corrected milk, cows eating 56 pounds of feed, 1.75. Obviously vastly different, and so we want to be looking at why are they so different? You know, because obviously this one down below is going to be much more profitable for that dairy. So with ECM feed efficiency, in terms of evaluating a pen, that's where I really see it being of value. Looking at it over time and looking at it in a pen. One spot where I've really used it is with, we plant quite a bit of brown midrib corn silage. It's lower in lignin, it's more digestible, cows can eat more of it than regular corn silage. But also, especially in some research studies where things are really carefully measured, sometimes they've gone up more in intake than they have in production. And that can really be a problem, right? If we start potentially really spending much more money on feed. So that's an example of where feed efficiency, I can really see it being of value. Knowing what that feed efficiency has been beforehand, we're coming in with a different forage. I saw one here on Sunday. It was a spring harvested type of ryegrass of really low NDF and high NDF digestibility. That would be another example where it'd be nice to have the feed efficiency number there, because we expect intake to really be going up. We want to see if the intake is going up as much as what we would expect it to do based on our production. Okay, so that's, to me, a real place that this can come in. So looking at these numbers, are they better or worse than expected, and why? Are cows eating more or less than I would have expected, which is going to influence this ratio then? And then, again, why? What should I try to do differently? Do I need some more straw in the diet? Is my straw that I have in the diet properly processed so that cows are consuming it? And now is that slowing down this passage of feed out of the rumen and giving me the ratio that I want? Okay, so those are examples of where I like it. Here's an issue with it. I'm going to show you some issues with it and why I don't want to only rely on this feed efficiency number. This is a line taken out of an article written on feed efficiency. So this is telling us how to calculate it. So actual feed intake is critical for an accurate feed efficiency value. Feed refusals should be removed, subtracted, as this feed has not been consumed. So for example, if a dairy manager targets 4% feed refusal with 50 pounds of dry matter offered, the correct value to use in the calculation is 48 pounds instead of 50 pounds, because we had the 2 pounds or 4% of refusal feed that something else was done with. Okay? So that's the correct calculation for feed efficiency. Well, so if he targets 8%, again, it doesn't matter at all for this calculation, right? Or if he targets 0.5%, doesn't matter at all for this calculation. But that can have a huge effect on the economics of the dairy. If we have a much higher refusal level and disposing of that feed in an uneconomic manner, that's a lot of additional cost, but our feed efficiency number could be exactly the same. Okay, so that's one example to me of where I have a concern with it overall. Here's another one. You guys heard of the shredlage processor? Okay, so there's a lot of interest in it, and it's a big discussion point in the US. This is the first research study done on it by Randy Shaver out of the University of Wisconsin. And so he presented it 2 years ago, super. So you guys, a lot of you have seen this data already. This isn't part of my talk, but I want to use this as an example. In Dr. Shaver's research study for this 3-month trial, cows that were fed the shredlage ate 55.8 pounds, the regular kernel processed corn silage 54.4. This is on a farm level, this is something we're looking at. P-value 0.08, that's important, right? When statistically, scientifically, we try to go for that 0.05 on your farm, you're thinking about, you know what? That might be real to me. Okay, milk, 96 pounds on shredlage, 94.2 on the KP. Okay, so almost 2 pounds more on the shredlage. Milk per dry matter intake, and this is just raw milk per dry matter intake, and I'll show you some other energy-corrected ones in just a moment. So actually 1.72, 1.73, statistically no difference at all. Obviously numerically lower on the shredlage. Oops. 3.5 fat-corrected milk, you can see, again, a little bit over 2 pounds more with the shredlage. That fat-corrected milk per dry matter intake, actually the feed efficiency, again, is numerically lower with the shredlage. Energy-corrected milk, all very similar, 2 pounds, numerically lower with the shredlage. I was sharing this information with a group of nutrition consultants, and one who's really good, near the front row, he said to me, well, I wouldn't want to use it. The feed efficiency is not any better. What do you think? It's true, isn't it? Feed efficiency is not any better. Cost of it, so that's one whole part of your partial budget you'd want to look at, right? So there's additional, I don't want to get into that whole year, additional cost with it. Have to have a different chopper, right? You got to get it in there. There's various things like that. Potentially greater benefit than this, boy, I've seen some corn silage extremely well processed with it. If you've got to feed corn silage soon after harvest, this could really help you because the starch is very well processed. Really can be. But, yeah, just to go on, the components, again, similar between the two. But here's the slide that we saw before here with our intake, our milk, our feed efficiencies, again, numerically about the same, slightly lower in shredlage. If we put numbers in there now, so we're right around, it's actually over 20 cents per pound per milk in the US. I use 20 cents per pound here. Our feed costs are around 14 cents per pound of dry matter. So 781 versus 762 for costs on feed, 1920 versus 1884 for income, 1139 versus 1122. So you're 17 cents, should have this over on the left-hand side, but you're 17 cents ahead on the shredlage, right? Your feed efficiency is exactly the same. It's actually a little bit lower with shredlage, but your income for your dairy is greater, right? So that's, to me, just an example of where we want to be cautious with feed efficiency. We can have a feed efficiency that's maybe even a hair amount lower, but remember, it's this ratio. So it depends on the economics of our milk and our feed and where we're at there, okay? Yeah, this feed cost is total TMR cost, and that's putting a value on our forages based on their resale value there. Okay, so that's where we're at, total TMR cost, all grains, all forages, typical cost in a dairy ration. Anyway, that's just my caution about it. If you thought about the entire dairy enterprise and tried to I'll do a dairy enterprise feed efficiency, well, that one actually doesn't even make sense to me. If we did like, for my whole dairy enterprise, pounds of energy-corrected milk sold, it's really pounds of total feed produced and purchased. You could say pounds of my total feed consumed, but boy, think about all the waste we could have that's left out of that number, right? So it would be to me, a senseless number. What's used in accounting is the one down below. We'll be looking at what's our income that we had from milk sales, what are our expenses we've had from feed costs. That makes a lot of sense. That's looking at the profitability in our dairy, and again, that's more similar to income over feed cost as well. So with dairy feed efficiency, where does it start? To me, there's a few ways of looking at it. We have the whole dairy enterprise, and that's looking at overall production and how can we influence production. I'll show you how that really influences feed efficiency. We've got biggies that influence that overall production, like forage quality. If we can have more of that feed that we've paid for, if it's forages or grain, and we reduce shrink, that obviously will increase our overall dairy economics and its enterprise, I'll call it, feed efficiency. So those are factors on the dairy enterprise side. And then in the pen, things that will influence what that feed efficiency number would be our transition cow health, reproduction, extra maintenance expenses that cows might experience. We're going to go through examples of these throughout our discussion here. If we have healthy cows in terms of rumens, feet, and udders, the use of research-proven additives, some of Trevor's work with multiple times of feeding versus only 1x feeding, low refusals, but not out of feed, and finally, minimizing how many treated cows we have so that hopefully that milk that we've paid money to produce is actually going to be sold rather than dumped.
Can you explain low orts?
Sure. So ort is just when I was in graduate school, that's what we called refusals. So low refusal levels so that we are not spending excess money on feed that way. And I'm going to show you some examples of how we can get there and be successful. Okay, this is looking at the normal relationship between what we'd expect between days in milk or lactation curve and milk production and dry matter intake. So we obviously expect our cows to freshen and to come up in production, peak at some point, and slowly go down. And intake is going to be rising. It will peak sometime post milk peak, and then it will also slowly be going down. Depending on production level, these lines hopefully will not cross. If it's a lower producing herd, they very well might. If it's a higher producing herd, they shan't. Okay, but the relationship is like that. Okay. This is just taking the numbers we just looked at and dividing them. So that milk production divided by the dry matter intake, and we almost get a straight line. It's not quite straight because of the changing differences in intake and milk production early on. But that slope averages a decrease of 0.11 per month. And they're at right around 150 days. It's, we're right there at 1.4, the average for that lactation curve there. Okay, so 1.4. One thing you can see from that is, boy, if I can move my cows into earlier days in milk range, I've got a higher feed efficiency, don't I? Right? If I have cows that a herd that's late days in milk, my herd's 210 days in milk, you can't expect to have a real high feed efficiency. Okay, so that's what's thinking about your dairy enterprise. If I can do things to have my herd earlier days in milk, that will help me to improve my feed efficiency. Jeez. There we go. Next, looking at production level. What we just looked at there is the middle black line. That's 22,000 pounds. These are those same slopes. So production divided by our predicted dry matter intake for that production level throughout her lactation. You can see that 28,000 pound herd, what its feed efficiency is going to be like, versus our 16,000 pound herd. So 1.15 average versus 1.6 average there. Okay, that's production. That's the effect of higher production. That's the effect of diluting out maintenance costs, right? We have a set amount of energy for maintenance that all animals have, including us. And now if we can be more productive as a dairy cow, if we can be more productive as producers or dairy consultants, right? That's what's going on there. We have a higher efficiency ratio. So again, to me, one basic factor of trying to achieve a higher feed efficiency, you need higher production, okay? 7.5 to 12,500 liters was the point. Yeah. From 7,500 liters up to 12,500 liters. Good enough. So with this in mind, this is one area I had started with in my days of having my independent consulting business, was thinking about, basically, I wasn't directly thinking about feed efficiency, I was thinking about how can I increase production across all my herds. And that was essentially increasing our forage quality. And that was having a forage management meeting where we tried to address all aspects of forage management. And I put this here because this is completely relevant to our discussion today. And I want you to think about it in your dairy. If you already have absolute top-notch forages with extremely little shrink, right, then you're meeting these goals already. If there's parts of, again, all these aspects that influence forage quality that potentially can be improved on your dairy, that's actually a way that you can then, in turn, improve feed efficiency on your dairy. One issue that we had, and I'm going to say had because we're really over it, as our dairies expanded, they bought bigger and bigger hay binds. As they bought bigger hay binds, what typically happened is that the cutter bar width got wider and wider, and the windrow width stayed the same. So essentially, obviously, we're putting more and more forage in the same area. We're getting a thicker and thicker pile. We're going to have more of a problem with getting it to dry out. This producer has made his windrows here as wide as what he could. This is third cutting alfalfa. He's got this 12-foot disc spine. He has an 8-foot merger. And because of that, he has a maximum width that he can spread it to. He chose about 7 feet. So 7-foot wide windrow divided by the 12-foot wide cutter bar. The windrow width is 57% of the cutter bar width. And the wider we can get it, ideally even up to 90%, it dries more quickly. The reason that's important is our weather isn't always sunny like it obviously is here. Okay? So we got this rain that comes in, and it comes in often. And we have to try to take these narrow little harvest windows we have and get our haylage adequately dry in a short time period. So this producer has a real successful program. You know, there it is. Good fiber numbers, appropriate dry matter on his second cutting. But this is from another producer. And he heard this presentation about, boy, if I go wider, I can get things to dry quicker. And so he took his hay binds and he removed actually his conditioners. Because for haylage, it's much less important having a conditioner than for hay. Hay, it's really helpful. Haylage, not so much. So he took these conditioners out. As you can see, spreads his alfalfa 100% all the way out. And that's the way we get more rapid dry downs. With that, then, well, first up above, this producer, you can kind of see in the front of the tractor, he's actually pushing one hay bind. He's pulling another. Those rollers have been removed. They've cut away metal so that alfalfa is being laid 100% all the way out. And there's an example of the alfalfa in the upper right-hand corner. Along with this whole process now, you've got to bring all that forage together. So these big continuous mergers have really caught on. And they're kind of like a baler head. So they're just picking up forage like this, picking it up, putting on a belt. This belt is running straight off like that, just about from here to that wall. This one is 34 feet long. So we have 34 feet. He made one pass down, 34 feet, one pass back, 34 feet, 68. It's about 8 feet wide or so. So it's about 75 to 76 feet of haylage, all brought into one windrow, all uniformly and quickly dried. Now we're ready to come through with that chopper. There's that chopped haylage right there, ready to be packed in the bunker silo, and it's gorgeous forage. So this talks about feed efficiency, right? This is part of feed efficiency. Because again, we're capturing more forage on our farm, we're having it much less likely to get rained on and losing crop there. We're having higher quality by having this rapid dry down. We're going to get more milk out of it. That's influencing our overall feed efficiency. With corn silage, the biggest thing we really look at there is trying to have our dry matter approximately in that 33 to 36% range where we have good ear fill, good starch development. That's what we're really after with corn silage, really good starch levels. And not being too dry or, again, too immature where we don't have our adequate starch levels. So those are, to me, just some of the big changes that I see that we've made in our forage management as well. So shrink, we have that expensive forage in. We're coming in. Obviously, we want to lose as little as possible. And one little issue we've had with the wider windrows is sometimes things getting too dry. And that's just one caution that we work with producers on, trying to not have that cutter, that windrower, get too far ahead of our chopper so things don't get too dry. Because we can have too much leaf loss and shatter when that occurs. This is corn silage being brought into a very poorly managed bunker silo. So one big tractor packing it, you know everything on this far side here is poorly packed, and there's going to be large losses in that low density forage. So that's an example of not doing it right. This drive over pile, they can drive both directions, very well packed. We're going to have much lower shrink losses as we increase that silage density. Okay, same thing here, these sheep's foot compactors, again, increasing silage density, lowering dry matter losses, improving silage quality as we have a better fermentation with less oxygen in that pile as well. This was an interesting one here. These are rollers from a train. So train cars, rail cars, or locomotives, the wheels that are on them. These rollers have been removed and they've been put into these gangs, and a couple of companies sell these products. This one on the left is one that was used at a neighboring dairy in my area, and they took densities on their corn silage from 2012 and 2013. It's as good of a study as I have to compare densities with this type of a management intervention. So that was the change that they made from one year to the next, adding that roller. And then we've got our two densities. And you can see this is from 1 foot from the bottom. In both years, they averaged 22.6, and I'm sorry, this is all in units that you may not be familiar with, but it's just pounds dry matter per cubic foot. Okay, so that's really dense, 22.6, 1 foot off the bottom. I also want to point out you can see 2013 was 1.5 points drier than 2012, which we'd expect, if anything, to have a little bit poorer compaction because of that. All right, so there we are, the same, 5 feet up. It's actually 4.5 pounds greater with that roller. 9 feet up, or 1.3 pounds greater. 13 feet, a tremendous amount higher, right? Overall, 3.8 pounds greater density. So this producer asked me, what do you think? Was it a good thing? Well, first we looked at numbers. It looks like a good thing. We're putting some numbers to it. This is a larger dairy. They put up about 17,000 tons of forage dry matter per year. Their ratio of corn silage to haylage is about 60 to 40, and they use dry matter values of $125 and $205 per dry matter ton for both of these forage, so $157 average forage value. We get at least 1% more dry matter recovery from our silo for every 1 pound we can increase that silage density. Okay? So if we can go from 15 to 16 pounds silage density, that dairy producer will have at least 1% more feed that he put in available to feed from lower dry matter losses. All right? So here we had 3.8 pounds, 3.8% less shrink at least. 3.8% times 17,000 tons times $157 per ton, it's $100,000. That piece of equipment costs about $14,000. And even if those numbers were off considerably for our density increases, let's say it was a 1 pound increase and a 1% decrease in shrink, it's $27,000. Okay? So this is an example where silage densities can also really improve your overall economic efficiency on your dairy, reducing shrink and having more feed available for your cows. Shrink is really expensive. Shrink is a big, big cost on our dairy, and it's something we want to keep as low as possible. With corn silage, typical ranges are 9 to 16%. These are typical good ranges, and probably the best I've seen is in that 9 to 10% range. That 12 to 15% is a pretty good number, and numbers above that are also common. Haylage, probably the lowest I've seen is in the, I've seen some single digits with haylage, 6, 7, 8% haylage, which is, again, extremely excellent management. 12 to 18%, very common. These are with grains now, flat storage, open front. 2.5% would be on the low side. 11% would be only moderately high. We could certainly have numbers much higher than that. Flat storage enclosed, we reduce that shrink number significantly. Bulky dry ingredients, like this is whole cottonseed hulls. Whole cottonseed is an excellent product on farm, or like your pellets that I've seen here, beet pulp pellets, citrus pulp pellets, they don't blow away. So that really helps to minimize shrink from that aspect. Upright overhead storage, bins in particular, again, really help us to reduce shrink and improve our overall efficiencies. Wet byproducts have bigger shrinks because we often lose a lot of the effluent that comes off of those wet byproducts. That's the primary reason for that. Overall, our average shrink observed across different ingredients is in that 8 to 10% range. And again, if we can look at ways to bring that down a little bit, that can have a very large effect on our economic efficiency on our dairy. So it's something I'd like you to look at on your dairy. Earlier today, those of you at my workshop, we saw this presentation, and silage management is a real big aspect of, to me, reducing that shrink there. Our goals are always, if we have any spoiled silage, to remove it, keep a really good vertical smooth face, removing enough silage to avoid any heating, mixing that removed silage with the loader buckets so we feed a consistent, uniform supply of forage for each load of feed that's prepared. Ideally having no loose feed at the end of feeding, and keeping that leading edge of plastic very well weighted down with tires or the gravel-filled tube bags, which I've seen on numerous dairies here, work excellent for that as well. Now they're just very well managed bunker silos, 2 of them, corn silage and high moisture corn. So we'll have minimal shrink there. Defacing is another tool I see helping us minimize shrink. Again, because this defacer is whipping around here. There's these prongs that stick out that are removing forage, but we're not doing any lifting. We're not causing any little fissure line there that can let air infiltrate into that pile and then start spoilage and dry matter loss. So this is good not only from a feeding perspective, but from a shrink reduction perspective as well. This is really valuable forage. This is organic wheatlage on a large organic dairy. And forages or organic feeds are all at least double the value of regular conventional feeds. So again, I had values there of $157 average. This is probably at least $250 per ton. And we've got big rips in the upper part of the plastic, huge amounts of spoil feed, which the only people that knew it were the people taking the tires off, and they hadn't really said anything. So something I think a really good practice is just if you're a dairy nutritionist or if it's your own operation, keeping a close eye on this. And again, I've seen numerous dairies who've been here on the dairies we've gone through thus far with the green heavy tarp covering them. That's a good protective piece of equipment, basically. I see that really helping you to minimize your shrink, and I was glad to see it on as many of operations as I have thus far. Whole crop.
Is that when you say wheatlage, was it? So the grains in there with the...
Yeah, so this wheatlage was actually, this was harvested just prior to that head starting to come out.
Yeah, so it's whole crop.
Right, so that was whole crop wheatlage. That's what was in there. Silo Stop, this oxygen limiting plastic, which came from Europe to the United States, is an excellent product. As many of you know now, it's an orange color. This is when it was still clear, but only about 5% as much oxygen gets through that as standard polyethylene. And it certainly can help to reduce spoilage and with that, shrink as well. So some real pictures here. Wet brewer's grains, supposed to be back in that enclosed area there to catch the liquids. And obviously we're losing some, we're missing some, aren't we? Wet brewers, I'll see if this is an international problem. Any of you feed wet brewers, first of all? Okay, do the trucks always show up exactly when they're supposed to? They never do they? Do they always bring just the amount that was agreed to always each week? I had a neighbor of mine this year, he got up to 12 semi-loads of brewers in his commodity area. He had become the dumping grounds. And it's a larger dairy, with 12 semi-loads of feed, of wet brewers. They're worth, for us, around $1,100 a ton. So we got over, like, almost close to $14,000 worth of wet brewers. And anyway, it's an issue and something we've got to watch. We want to try to keep on good feed, but that's one of those problems. These are forages. They're here in this area, so the mixing is occurring right in that area as well, but obviously we've got a lot of it being pushed over that wall as it's being loaded, and we're losing feed there as well. This is a farm that does feed wet brewers, and there's a slowdown time coming, and they use distillers grains to largely replace the brewers. So we bought a lot of distillers and tried to fit it all in this commodity bay. It didn't fit very well. Okay? So the wind was taking care of it, and that the part that was coming out was, as you can see, it's disappearing there. And soon, all of his distillers will fit into that commodity shed. Again, the bins I mentioned are an excellent way to work to keep shrink low, and that's what we see on this operation on the left. Actually, the same operation had big grass square bales, and they stored them inside a semi-trailer, which they just had up on blocks, and they could drive into that with their skid steer, take out one bale at a time, and process that bale, and then feed it. And it was a neat little way that they were really minimizing shrink on that hay. I got to visit Japan a couple of times several years ago, and as I think you probably all know, their grain has been expensive for a long time. And it's been very expensive because they import most of it. And this was an interesting, it was several dairies that had come together and put up a feeding center. And this was their combined feeding center, which then supplied feed for all of the dairies. And their grains are all there in those upright bins. And here's this fellow who's preparing the loads of feed. He can pull in. He basically just pulls a rope that opens up the spout, comes straight down into that mixer wagon. They've got that windbreak material up on either side. And you can see by looking around there, a lot of grain shrink, isn't there? I couldn't find anything. It was really impressive. So that was neat. Again, I showed this picture earlier today, but it's a nice little windbreak, which was obviously not very expensive. And you can just envision his feeder either backing in or pulling around through and then backing up. And now he's loading out of a lot of the wind. Blowing in our area, blowing leads to a lot of shrink. And so this is a way to try to minimize that and again, improve our efficiencies through so doing it. Okay, moving more into that pen, thinking about ways that we're going to increase feed efficiency with things that we're doing with our cows. We're going to start out with transition cows. This is an unbelievable graph. So unbelievable, I had to look closely at the commands on it to make sure it wasn't doctored, but it's true. What we've got here, this is a herd of cows, and each of these boxes represents an individual cow, and this is her first test projected 305-day mature equivalent production. Okay, so based on that first test, what her parity is and what's her days in milk and what level, how many pounds of milk she had there. That's her 305 ME prediction. And we've got heifers in red and second lactation animals in green and our older cows there in yellow. And you can see we're coming along here and there's an awful lot of scatter, isn't there? You see a lot of animals down here that are not performing well and really having problems. And then all of a sudden, it looks like whoever wrote this command said, okay, for cows less than 110 days in milk, we'll make this command differently. But they actually didn't. What they did was they reduced stall stocking, increased bunk space up to 30 inches for their pre-fresh and 28 inches for the post-fresh cows. And all these subordinate animals that have been struggling before, now they did that much better, didn't they? It's interesting that the dominant cows who were getting up there and getting feed before, there's no increase in their performance. They did essentially the same. But cut out those low-end animals. And again, through that, we basically moved up that whole lactation curve for that operation. I shouldn't say we, these people did. And then their feed efficiency is going to go up along with that. Okay, so that's a really neat management success story. This was a study I had done with, it was with brown midrib corn silage, but you could think about just with digestible forage, or you could think about it as anything I do to help my transition cows will pay me back for the entire lactation, okay? Because all those things are true. And here, in this nutritional intervention, we increase intake before and after freshening, and this is 3.5% fat-corrected milk in kilograms here, everyone. And they had this better forage for the first 3.5 weeks of lactation, and then they all went on the same diet this is through up to week 15. Okay, and you can see that difference never went away. And again, it's anything we can do to help cows through transitions so that they're more successful, we get paid back for the whole lactation. That's an improvement in feed efficiency now from what you saw earlier, since we moved up our production level for that entire herd. Okay, earlier days of milk, right? We saw where earlier days of milk lead to higher feed efficiencies. To do that, we need great repro. And this is a herd that we use lots of synchronization programs. And this is their days in milk at first breeding for this herd. They're on a weekly double ob-sync program is what's being done here. And these are just a weekly pool of cows. This is their days in milk at first breeding. You can see it never goes above, here it's 87 days, I think, because they start a new pool every week and everyone gets bred there. They do a great job of implementing that program and doing it successfully, but also, of course, helping cows through transition well so that they breed appropriately. And that leads to, first, high service rates. This is just first service, but they've got aggressive programs for other services as well. So overall, that's service rate, 71% of services are achieved in this dairy for a 29% pregnancy rate. So out of 100 cows in that 3-week pool, for example, 29 of them are pregnant. That's a good number, right? Those of you that look at that. So again, that's going to be earlier day in milk cows. That's an improvement in feed efficiency because you moved your herd up in terms of its overall days in milk. We want to reduce extra maintenance expenses, and then we'll talk about having healthy cows here. So extra maintenance expenses, what do we mean by that? Well, one of my research projects when I was a graduate student at Cornell, there was this nutrition program called the Cornell Net Carbohydrate and Protein System. You know, something that Cornell had worked on putting together over a number of years. And my whole goal was to be an applied nutritionist, applied dairy consultant, and have my own business when I got done. And so the program was, part of my program was to go out and work with dairies and collect these really accurate inputs for the CNCPS and then evaluate how well the model was predicting. And I used that program in those herds and then in other herds. And what I saw was its predictions for what that, let's say this pen here, how much they would be eating based on their production level and their component level. It would predict they'd be eating, let's say, 56 pounds, and they'd be eating really close to 56 pounds. And then based on those 56 pounds of feed, it would say, for example, they could make 100 pounds of milk, the model would predict, and they'd be making within typically a pound of milk of what the model had said. Okay, so extremely close, and it was really neat. That type of herd is right on the money. This herd, this is that nice herd in Wisconsin we talked about earlier. This is a herd in Wisconsin that hadn't been under 100 pounds for a long, long time. And you see, again, these really comfortable cows. There's some older fens there still doing a good job. You see a neck rail in front, good cow access to feed. So extra maintenance expenses, not there. Another Wisconsin dairy, they actually were making a bunch of money, but this herd would not have been as accurate when I looked at my model predictions. And this is the slide I wanted to get to. Again, when we looked at that model and what it predicted, this herd would be very close. If I went to a herd like this now, and my model predictions would say this herd should be making about 80 pounds of milk based on how much feed that they're eating. But actually, they're only making, it might be 70 pounds of milk. It could really be that much different. Much, much less. But they're eating all that feed. They're not making the milk. Why is that? Well, I think there's several reasons why. The first one is it takes more energy to do what those cows are doing, right? Standing there versus lying down comfortably. So there's extra energy, extra maintenance energy associated with that. Along with that, we've got altered meal patterns typically in these uncomfortable herds like that. We might have more slug feeding, poor rumen digestion, might have more subacute rumen acidosis and poor rumen digestion, and all those things are really hurting efficiency. So this is a way to improve feed efficiency right here. You've got, again, more nutrients going for production versus maintenance. We've got better digestion. We've got healthier cows. And we all know this. We're going to do better. But I just wanted to point out it's a way to improve our feed efficiency. Okay, the healthy cows, rumens, feet, and udders, I'm mostly leaving that up to other discussions that have been going on here. But the exact same thing is true for what we just looked at there for extra maintenance of costs, right? If we have healthier feed on cows, of course, they're going to be doing much better there as well, and that will improve feed efficiency. So I work for Diamond V, and I want to just talk to you about two additives. They say use proven additives that can help to improve feed efficiency. And the first one is rumensin. And in the United States, rumensin has an FDA approval for increasing feed efficiency. That's its FDA label. And this is just an example of that. What it typically does is as more of it is fed, you see dry matter intake going down. This is overall milk. It might go up a little bit. Typically, the energy or fat-corrected milk is very similar across the feeding level of rumensin. But what really goes down is intake. And that leads to the improvement in feed efficiency. So very widely used in the United States as a successful feed additive. This is one study I just wanted to share with you with Diamond V research. And this was published in the journal Dairy Science. It's 38 Holsteins, averaging 105 days of milk at the start of the study, 200 days of milk when the study concluded. In this study, the researchers measured daily dry matter intake and production, a 2-week covariate period to see what these intakes and production levels were, 12 weeks of data collection, and Diamond V fed to the treatment cows. And you see this increase in production of just over a pound, not statistically significant. 2 pounds more, 4% fat-corrected milk. In this study with the animal numbers, that wasn't significant. 2 pounds less intake, which is a lot, but here, again, with the animal numbers, it wasn't significant. But he put those two things together of 2 pounds, or basically there's exactly almost a kilogram, almost 2 pounds more milk there with a reduction in intake. Put those two things together, and it's a large improvement in feed efficiency. So a very economic approach for that dairy. So my point here is with any additive that you might look at, they can be profitable for you. And you want to look at research that might be there to make sure has a very high likelihood of being profitable for you. That's my point there, and they can, again, help with feed efficiency. Low ORT, so lower refusals, but not having animals out of feed. So let me show you some examples of that. I had collected this information a few years ago when I wanted to try to look at refusal levels and how that might be influencing intake on herds, and could we be successful basically with low refusal levels. So I went to a few dairies in the area where I live in central New York, and this first one, this is information from a pen of cows here. It's 105 cows averaging 87 pounds of 3.5% fat milk. They were 240 days in milk. Bovine somatotropin being used on a 12-day interval in this herd. That's the dairy you see on the right with their defacer, and they would use that. They would take approximately daily dry matters and forages that were removed with that defacer, and their refusal goal was about 3%. So what we have here, this is our pen dry matter intake, and you see some of these swings here are associated with the BST cycle. So we give BST and cows will be going up in milk and they go up in feed intake, and they taper off. But there's other swings around there that aren't necessarily associated with production. The 3% ORT goal, basically that was what they were shooting for. If the cows were higher or lower, they would adjust to try to stay at that 3% level. This is what the dairy looked like inside. So this is the pen we're actually looking at. This is what approximately 3% refusal looks like. And just one question I'd have for you. You can see one cow up here. This pen's about ready to go and get milked. So this feeder had just pushed this feed up right here. They're about ready to go and get milked. This pen will go in next. Do you think if there would have been more feed there, would those cows have eaten more before they went and lied down? Or would there be more cows up eating right now if there was 5% or 6% feed left over? Do you think? I highly doubt it. That's pretty darn good. Okay, so I highly doubt it. And that, again, is in that 3% range. So the reason that feeder had pushed that feed out of the way, it has to do with Dr. Gauden talked about earlier, especially with Yoni's control. This feed, leftover feed will go to some bred heifers, so he doesn't have to drive through that crossover there. He pushed it up by hand. They're scraping it up now. Cows are going to go and get milked, and they're going to get fed, and that's what it looked like. Wanted to include this picture just to show you, this is another barn on that same operation. This is a 6-row barn. The other one had been a 4-row. So this is a 6-row barn with 20% overcrowding, and cows are just coming back from being milked. And it looks crowded, doesn't it? It is. It's a populated pen. But it's also a dairy that typically averages right around 95 pounds of milk. They're very successful with it, and they do a darn good job of it. Okay, so that was one dairy. Now we're going to another one, Dairy B. And this is a 100 cow group. At this time, they're averaging 93 pounds of 3.2% fat milk. They're 255 days in milk. This was in this pen. BST at 14-day intervals. Fairly routine dry matters on their forages. They scrape across that face when they have enough room to do that, and they're obtaining their forages. Their refusal goal was around 3.5%. I couldn't find anybody in the 5 to 6% range. So this is the highest I could find at 3.5%. And then they would adjust their feeding rate also by the amount of that ORT. And here, again, you see our intakes moving around some. And I just put dates on here. This is January 10th. This group went from 65 pounds in 2 days down to 54 pounds. That's a huge drop in intake. And something big happened there, most likely a big dry matter adjustment, I would think. Here on February 7th, you see a few pound drop. Now, right across the feed alley was this next pen, and here are the dates. January 10th, this group also dropped. So again, that's a herd effect. Affected both these pens, they both dropped in intake. Here's February 7th on that pen right across the way, there's no effect on intake. February 8th, nothing. February 9th, nothing. February 10th, they came down a bit. So what we just saw before, that was a pen effect. Something happened in that pen that, again, really influenced intakes. And we look at this fluctuation here. Again, some of this BST, some of this dry matter intake changes, but there's quite a bit of fluctuation in those intake numbers. This is some beef data now. And in this beef data, so these feeders, they've been with their mother out on the beautiful western range, and now they're weaned at maybe, now it's what, close to 500 pounds they're weaned at. They come into a feedlot, and how should these animals be brought up on feed? And there's different ways that it can be done. One can be ad lib, where the feeder is looking at how much feed's in that bunk, And here, they're eating it really well. I'm going to get more and more. Oh, now they're backing off. I'm going to cut them back. They're eating more and more. I'm going to give them more. Oh, they're backing off. I'm going to cut them back. So that's the ad lib approach. This is the amount that was fed based on what that bunk was like. Okay, so it's not exactly dry matter intake, but it's really related to it because the feeder's calling it based on how much feed is in the bunk. The other approach is I'm going to bring them up on this much more digestible feed slowly. When they reach the peak intake I want them to be at, then I'm going to hold it there. And this is this managed delivery of feed. And interestingly, in this study here, the managed delivery had identical average daily gains and significantly improved gain to feed ratios, of course, because none of this feed was ever offered as compared to that ad lib group. So these are, again, these aren't dairy cows. These are ruminants, but not dairy cows. But it just makes me wonder a little bit about our refusal levels and if maybe sometimes we influence what those fluctuations are like. So this dairy, our goal here is a refusal level of 0.5%. Okay? And that's on the right-hand side. You can see 0.5, and usually the dairies has been achieving it. This is a 300 cow group, and at this time they were making 87 pounds of this 3.7% fat milk, 260 days in milk. Interesting thing here now, BST at 14-day intervals, but within a pen, half the cows get it this week, half the cows get it next week. Okay? So 14-day interval, but within a pen, we've got half and half. So we're rotating it like that. They have this lower, I said 0.5, here I've got 0.75. But anyway, a low refusal goal. They adjust the feeding rate by only ½ pound if those intakes are high or low. So we're not going to go way up or way down. We're going to go up or down half a pound. And now we look at this, and there's a little movement there, right? But you never have a huge drop, and there's also never a huge, well, this is the biggest one that happened here, a few pounds. I don't know what went on there. But basically, much more stable overall intake. This is the pen directly across the feed alley from it. Again, you see these really stable numbers there. And that just has me a bit intrigued. If potentially some of that fluctuation that we see in some herds is induced by having too much feed available. So to make that work, 0.5%, boy, you gotta have things really in line to try to have your refusal levels that low. The first thing is, all the feed that goes in there has got to be good feed. You could never have the top rotten stuff, which might constitute a couple percent of the TMR, go into the TMR with 2% and expect to feed the cows down to 0.5%, right? So no junk goes in there, only good feed. This dairy, again, I mentioned this earlier this morning, but this forage is going to be defaced, removed, put in this feed truck, brought from bunker silos, which are a little ways away, over here to right behind the commodity shed. Discharged, so now we have our haylage, our corn silage, pre-mixed, very uniform. We've taken out this variation that is occurring all across our silo, made this very uniform feed. It has to be like that if we're going to feed for a tight refusal level. The main reason I see when cows eat really well, that means we fed forages yesterday of lower dry matter. Okay, that's why they ate really well. Or the cows didn't eat well last night. I fed forages yesterday that were drier than what I had in my ration set up there. Okay, so this is just that same dairy right on the other side of where we saw that forage dump there. Our grain mix and cornmeal right beside it. So we have a very quick, accurate load that can be made. These cows, they should have been fed a little bit earlier because you can see some that are lying down. They're just coming back from the parlor, but this is what they're coming back to. They're not too excited about eating this right now, but here's what's coming. There's more cows coming back. It's being scraped up. When I mentioned it has to be good feed yet, that's what it looked like. So not just the long, coarse, bad stuff, still good TMR. That's what we have to have that. And now they're being fed. So it's made me, just through working with this dairy, made me realize we can have very low refusal levels. I don't think cost us production, and potentially have some health benefits as well. The other thing that really brought this on was the yonis that Dr. Godden talked about earlier. When you have this refusal, if there's 4 or 5% of it, what do you do with it? And some people try to go with low groups with it, and we can get rid of some of it that way. You're still going to have refusal for them. What do I do with it now? I can't give it to your dry cows. It's too high of an energy feed. It doesn't belong there. You give it to your heifers, your bred heifers. It's too much energy for them typically. That's an issue. Your small heifers, that's a big yonis risk. So the first thing we've really tried to do is let's reduce how much we have there. And that's a big reason that we really got into that. Okay, so that's my low or refusal discussion. Finally, obviously minimizing the treated cows. All of that milk we've worked so hard to get, if we have too much mastitis, everyone hates mastitis, right? But just really trying to implement different ideas that were discussed earlier and are maybe being discussed right now to try to minimize mastitis on your dairy is another way to improve your overall efficiency on your dairy. So what's it worth? Well, to me, obviously, it depends on how much room we have improvement in any of those areas that I discussed on a given dairy. But just some 4 examples. With forage quality, moving from medium to better to optimum, I mean, there's often several pounds of milk that are available there. And I said 5 pounds of milk, if we said 20 cents, we could easily have $1 that would be there. If we could reduce shrink by 5% with our $7 feed costs, and this was using that 14 cent per pound of dry matter, which I used earlier, and look at all areas of feed loss on our dairy and try to really tighten that down, that could be worth potentially 35 cents. Transition cow health, things we can do to improve them, those slides I shared with you, and higher production that goes along with that. Again, you could easily get 40 cents there. Greater repro, earlier day in milk cows, we know that increases feed efficiency. Making cows more comfortable, reducing energy wastage and increasing production. The proper use of researched additives, and I think really watching refusal levels and bringing them down. Again, this number varies with every dairy, but the point is there's real money that's available here, and I am sure that every one of you has something here that you're doing really well on, and some other ones where you can work on improving on as well. And that's what I'd like for you to think about. Okay, I'd be happy to take any questions you'd have then as well.
Thank you very much indeed, Bill. Thank you. Is there a question for Bill? But yes, please. Warwick, would you mind just to the, yeah, there we go, across there. Thank you very much.
Hi, Bill.
Hi there.
I'm just interested in your thoughts on multiple feeding during twice, 3 times a day maybe, and you know how you balance the extra push-outs with the sort of overall feed efficiency. And you know, obviously, there's benefits to dry matter intake, but overall, is it beneficial to do that, or would you be better off just having higher quality forage in one feed and having less push-outs?
Okay. So I think everyone heard the question, but let me kind of rephrase things and make sure I've got done what you're thinking here, okay? One of the dairies I've gotten to work with for a very long time is one that I showed here. It's actually the first one with the refusal level. And what we typically feed 1 time per day. And we'd watch forages and they weren't heating. We'd come into the summer months and you'd go to 2 times per day feeding. And I remember we're doing that, went to 2X feeding, and actually overall intake went down a little bit. And we've got really good intake measurements on this dairy. They went down a little bit. We both kind of thought about it and thought, man, 2X feeding, it's harder, it's more work, we're getting a little less intake. That probably doesn't make sense. I'll go back to 1X feeding, that's better, okay? Then several years later, I saw research, and Trevor's been involved with some of this research, where actually intake might go down some, but overall production stayed the same or improved a little bit. And something we often can't pick up on a farm. And they did that because when cows are fed once per day, that's when they consume their biggest meal and greatest amount of feed. It's like a slug feeding effect, right? And when we have that big slug feeding effect, we have more changes in the rumen. We're putting more risk at a subacute rumen acidosis, maybe some reduced digestion with that feed. With a couple of times per day feeding, we've reduced that. We've stabilized things more. We can get more out of our feed and improve our efficiency, and actually with a little bit less intake, get as much or more milk. Refusal levels, that will be cleaned up only once per day. So we're going to feed that second time. We're not going to worry about what's there at all. We're going to feed them again and do that. And it's only once per day that we're really looking and cleaning up that bunk. And so it doesn't really influence that part as well as much. In terms of the amount, when I've worked with producers about this, often it's really like, geez, how do I do that? I'm feeding, this much this time. Do I have to feed half and half? You don't have to feed half and half at all. As Dr. DeFries's research has really shown again, it's not pushing up the feed. I'm losing you guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Pushing up the feed doesn't bring the cows up. Delivering the new feed does. And as long as there's enough new feed that's been delivered that they look and see, yeah, I got something new there, I'm interested, I'm excited about going up there, that's what we're after. Okay? So that's how I really try to have people work with it. I got to ask Trevor in his presentation the other day, with some of his work with it, did he look at the time between those feedings? And is there a necessary amount of time? For example, does it have to be at least 8 hours? And he said in their research, they had tried to look at these shorter intervals, and they couldn't find a difference between the longer intervals. So the recommendation was, all 2X feedings were looked at the same. There wasn't a time interval there. Because that, to me, is often the biggest issue. If we said it had to be at 12 hours, for example, that doesn't work out with most management schemes on most dairies. But we can have it so that they're fed once in the morning, and then, let's say, as many hours later as we can, and still have it work with normal management on the dairy. That can be a benefit overall to that operation. So that's why I really try to look at it.
Thank you.
Yep, you bet.
Heaven, Warwick, Heaven's just got a question.
Is there a danger that short-term improvements in feed efficiency could be as a result of body condition loss and therefore impact negatively on efficiency later on if reproduction suffers? I feel it's important to smooth the data over regular measurements rather than just take snapshots and look at improvements which may actually be somewhat false.
Sure. So the point there, short-term improvements in feed efficiency might have long-term ramifications that we're missing on the dairy because we're taking reserves from that cow to be part of that feed efficiency part. That's what happens real early in lactation. That's why cows are over 2 typically on feed efficiency really early. They're taking nutrients off their back, right? And that's why they can have that really high feed efficiency. Obviously, we can always be, and some fresh cows might be well above 2, let's say 2.4. You can't have a whole lactation at 2.4. It doesn't mathematically work out. Okay, so that's kind of what you're saying. Another, along with that, you could say a low refusal level. I brought them down to this really low level. I didn't lose any milk. Boy, it looks pretty good. And long-term wise, maybe in that theory, it wasn't working. Okay? We've done this for years here, what I just showed you, so I'm comfortable and confident with it. When everything's done the way that I described there. Cows aren't out of feed. Okay? We don't have, some dairies, they went to a low refusal level, and they didn't do all of the other steps. All those other steps are things like, as I mentioned, really good dry matters, making sure your forage is uniformly representing all forage from that corn silage or haylage mucker, not from a region. That's a huge one. Okay? Great communication between your herd managers and your feeders. Any cow movement that's going to be happening, everyone knows about it ahead of time. We feed cows appropriately like that. We do those things, we can tighten that up. Otherwise, I agree with you completely. We got to be careful of maybe a short-term gain and make sure it's not costing us longer term.
Maybe a slight oversupply of protein for a few weeks will get a yield response, but it will be at the expense of body condition.
Okay, so the point was, if we maybe could we drive some extra milk out of cows by putting more protein in there and taking some reserves from them? Impossibly. But
thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry. Bill.
I'd just like to ask Bill, with that, if you're going down in your refusals, or what's left, how important is the surface that the cows are eating off?
Yeah, good point, Warwick. Yeah, I don't know if any research, it's more just testimonial. We have lots of farms that put down tile surfaces, nice and smooth, as opposed to concrete, which pits over time. And as you guys know, you can bring your finger in there and take that nice slimy guck that's this deep just about. I can't believe that that doesn't have some negative effect on intake. And when people have put that smooth surface in there, I've just had numerous reports where we've seen an improvement in intake. Okay, it's not 5 pounds, it's a slight increase. I think it's there. So, with your question, down to 0.5, geez, I would say spend the money and fix your bunk, right? Now you can take advantage of this lower refusal level and get higher intakes. Maybe it would make a difference, Warwick, but I don't have any numbers on it in terms of how refusal level might influence, how level of refusal might vary in its success based on the pittedness of your bunks. But it makes sense. We want it to be as good as possible. Yeah.
You do? Yeah. Okay, just at the front. Last question, please.
Bill, using headlocks, does that help feed efficiency? Does that reduce the amount of dry matter that cows throw on their backs some people have claimed that you lose about a pound of dry matter just because they're more prone to throwing, feed on their backs, and
Right.
then they're saying the investment you put in for headlocks pays off in about 6 to 7 months, just calculating some of the benefits of using headlocks. So, any comment on that?
Sure. So just a question about headlocks, and do we get an improvement essentially in feed efficiency because there's less feed wasted when we have a headlock because cows aren't doing this, right? Throwing feed back there. There was a study in Western U.S. where that was the main reason for the difference between cows that were fed from a neck rail versus from a feedlot. And there's a lot more throwing of feed on their backs. But one thing I really wondered about that, and I have seen it. Quick question for you. Do cows throw as much feed on their back in the wintertime as in the summertime? What do you guys think? Same amount, more in the winter or less in the winter? Summertime more? I see summertime more. And there's flies that are bugging cows. And they're irritating them. And I think it's one approach to cows. It's one reason they do it, basically. And that research that I mentioned there was Western U.S. research, and there can definitely be flies in that warmer environment for a longer time period. So I would put that out as one consideration in it.
Sorry, Bill, just on
Sure.
that one, in America, I mean, with the tails, your cows would be docked?
Yeah, the majority are docked. There's definitely people that, it varies. There's still, the majority are probably docked. There's more farms that are not docking, that are cutting switches, but I would say the majority are still docked. They can't reach everywhere, obviously, even with a tail, right? So it still would be an issue.
Okay.
There's one other quick comment on that, though.
Please,
One thing I see with a neck rail, though, you often can't get nearly as many cows up eating at the same time. Right? You got more dominant cows that are standing more sideways like this, taking up more space, and with the headlocks, they line up more, and they can't exhibit that dominant effect as much and keep other animals away. So that's another benefit of headlocks there, too.
Thank you so much indeed, Bill. I'm going to draw it to a close, if that's all right for this afternoon. I'm sorry, as your chairman, I've overrun by 10 minutes, but it's an illustration, really, of the strength of Bill's talk. I guess that's my excuse anyway, that we're 10 minutes late. But also, I think Bill has given us a big problem this week because tomorrow there are 40 people that are going to go to the farm to do the farm audit with this man. And so good luck if you're on that trip. It's going to be a heck of a day. So thank you very much indeed for your time, Bill. It's been great to have you here this week. So thank you very much.